The Brics summit, which begins today, is proof of how illusionary it is to see the world through the prism of the Euro-Atlantic bubble. Beyond it, there's a political reality that's never spoken of. The leaders of the Western world think the entire world belongs to them. The world revolves around them. But now, with the war in Ukraine, people are starting to wake up. The leaders of China, Brazil, South Africa and India meet for the 15th time. The host this time virtually is China, which promises a lot after the meeting. President Xi Jinping wants to encourage partners to cooperate in a model other than imposed by capitalism, liberalism and globalization. Back in May, Xi Jinping called on countries to reject the Cold War mentality and build a new security architecture. What he didn't add, but what was clearly echoing, is the assumption that China will be at the center of it all. And it will happen, and we will see China's rise, because all parties at the Brics will benefit from it.
Прошу вас. Мы гордимся, что в ходе специальной военной операции наши бойцы действуют мужественно, профессионально, как настоящие герои.
For Putin's Russia, it's all good news. Putin will also participate in this year's Brics. At the Brics, no one rejects, marginalizes, or intends to condemn him or Russia. None of the member states at Brics has taken a clear stand against Russia like the Europeans and the Americans have. None of them announced sanctions. Russian planes still have access to the airspace of China and India, and both countries are importing Russian energy. This weakens the effect of Western sanctions and their long-term goal, which is to put the Russian economy on the brink of functioning. Russia can't export raw material to Europe almost at all, so it's now looking for alternative recipients and finding them without any problems at all whatsoever, because China or India don't really care about the war in Ukraine like the Europeans and the Americans do. And you just have to look at the facts. Back in May, India made an offer to Russia to buy Russian oil, but for no more than $70 a barrel. At that time, prices in the world markets broke around the $100 barrier. Indian refineries added their 3 cents to the negotiations, demanding a permanent discount. Yes, oil will always be cheap for the Indians, as long as they buy from Russia, at least $35 a barrel less than the global price. And Russia of course has agreed to this, because no one else would accept such a big quantity of oil. Let's not forget, India is a huge market and nobody wants to lose them. The situation is similar to China, which increased its imports of Russian oil by 28% last month, and month to month it's continuing to grow. Cheap Russian oil is literally falling from the sky in China, and all parties are happy. In comparison, in the West, there's an energy crisis. But as I said, the ongoing Brics Summit is not all about Russia. The event has been organized by the Chinese to rebuild their model of international cooperation. The Brics countries are even discussing an alternative to the dollar system. Calls are growing for a parallel payment system to counter US hegemony. It's all going downhill for the US, and China has been patiently watching and playing its cards right. China hasn't been sitting idly whilst the world has been focused on Ukraine. China has been regularly conducting flights around Taiwan, an island which China claims to be theirs, and the US has threatened if China does take it over, the US would respond. But China will just keep on daring, and the US won't do anything. And we all know the US will never respond directly. They'll most likely will try to get the Taiwanese to fight China by supplying them with weapons, just like how the US uses Yankee jihadists. However, we all know that the US is doomed for disaster. It won't win against the Chinese.
对，就我们这些人也是原来的人，黑头发、黄皮肤，传承下来的，我们叫龙的传人。
Red hair, yellow skin. We call ourselves the inheritance people going down from dragon. Sons and daughters of dragon.
Brazil is also at the Brics summit. It's a member state, eyeing the Asian market, especially with food exports in mind. It's the country's main source of profit, and China is the largest consumer of Brazil's soybeans and beef. Jair Bolsonaro was making out with Putin at the Kremlin just before the special military operations in Ukraine, because Jair Bolsonaro needed the war in Ukraine to happen and didn't really care what the collective West would think about him. I say this because Bolsonaro too is struggling with inflation and a rolling recession, and elections are ahead of him, so he wants Brazil to replace Russia as a key player in the global food supply chain. And that's what will happen, and that's why Bolsonaro is at the Brics summit, because it opens the market further for him, as well as provides logistical support for food to be exported from Brazil to Asia.
South Africa is by far the most advanced economy on the African continent, but the size of the country's GDP pales into insignificance when compared to other Brics members.
It's also good to note, from the beginning of the Brics alliance, South Africa was its most active member, and apart from a few raw materials, it's got little to offer. But South Africa is the key to expanding on the continent. Africa is super rich, and Indian and Chinese investments in South Africa are growing, and things will only grow further for South Africa and Africa as a whole. However, like India, which is also close to the United States and the collective West, who's at the summit, South Africa also plays on many fronts. President Cyril Ramaphosa will accept the invitation of German Chancellor Olaf Scholz 3 days after the Brics summit and will be a guest at the G7 meeting. The very organisation of the Brics summit, with the participation of mostly Eastern members at a time when Russia is breaking international norms, some of my European friends think this is all outrageous. I live in Europe, and I can tell you there's a lot of upset Europeans over Ukraine. They don't want to understand why the conflicts happened. All they do is watch the news and become emotional through US propaganda. The problem is they are only fed one view of the world, the Euro-Atlantic point of view. For decades, Putin and leaders like him have been creating their own order, in which the game is played by rules other than those of NATO or the European Union. An alternative ecosystem to the liberal one has existed for years and is doing well, even in the midst of a war waged by one of its main actors. Washington, London, Berlin or Brussels have looked in other directions for too long, or simply at each other, ignoring other directions of economic and diplomatic cooperation. And right now, no doubt, with Brics leaders looking at each other for benefit, for once, is definitely going to shake up the current world order. Before I leave you, if you are anti-Putin, anti-Russia and are unhappy with the war in Ukraine, there is a solution, and I present you the solution in my next clip. Sayonara.
If you cannot sleep because of Russia-Ukrainian conflict, there are some advices to calm you down. First, imagine that this is happening in Africa. Imagine this is happening in the Middle East. Imagine Ukraine is Palestine. Imagine Russia is the United States.